I'd like to call the May 12th, 2026 Planning Commission regular meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments remove the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threaten to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. David, will you please call roll?
Yeah, Commissioner Ham,
Here.
Commissioner Lehman,
Here.
Commissioner Tagney,
Here.
Vice Chair Strickland,
Here.
and Chair Simmons.
Here, and I will note that we are joined today by Community Development Director David Loya and Senior Planner Dilo Freitas. Next on our agenda, we have oral communications. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on one of our agenda items, you will have an opportunity when we are discussing those items. If you have comments about items that are not listed on our agenda today, please line up now behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make comments on matters that are not on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen. I actually think they've moved that to the bottom of the screen, or by pressing *9 on your phone. The clerk will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. With that, I'd like to open public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment during early oral communications. Feel free to state your name for the record. And can we have the first speaker, please?
Claim to want to dispel narratives of colonial histories of the land, and you're going to immediately follow it like you did on April 28th with, trying to, you're uplifting settler colonialism with your meetings here. You did it at the last meeting by doing all you needed to do to preserve the settler colonial architecture of some buildings in the plaza. You had somebody come up here and talk to you about how they lamented the loss of beautiful gold rush era architecture, colonial architecture, and none of you had a problem with it. You all gleefully just accepted this permit. You've done nothing to really dispel a settler colonial narrative. You've done nothing. Your land acknowledgement is phony. You give it with all the gusto of a kid who's being forced to give an apology they don't believe in. You know, you're supposed to be an environmental lawyer. You're the one giving the land acknowledgement. You should know that 80% of all the Earth's biodiversity lies in indigenous lands. So the best thing we can do is give the land back. So you sit here and you claim to try to dispel these narratives, and now we're going to go and you're doing it again this week with your Whaley House stuff. You did it on April 28th by finishing your land acknowledgement and then going directly into how can we preserve settler colonialism in our buildings. You wanted to keep the bars on the old post office set up. What, were we incarcerating mail too? Like, what is the point of a land acknowledgement you don't mean? There's nothing behind it. All you do is you sit here and you talk about it. You acknowledge. Your acknowledgement doesn't acknowledge the land or the plants or the animals who are also subject to genocide of the people who built Arcata. Ben Kelsey, responsible for untold number of deaths, is on a plaque on our fire department. You all sit here and you think you're doing something with your land acknowledgement. You're checking off a box. You're trying to placate. It's performative politicians, and I'm tired of it. I don't need my 3 minutes. That's all I got to say. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Do we have anyone else for early oral communications? Anyone online?
No one online.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the consent calendar. We have one item on consent, which is to approve Planning Commission meeting minutes from our regular meeting on April 28th, 2026. Would any commissioner like to pull the item, or do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Our public hearing this evening is whether to adopt resolution PC 2603 for Whaley House proposed rehabilitation and lot split at 1395 H Street, Arcata, file number 256016 PM PDP. Can we please begin with a staff report? Yes, go ahead, Peter.
I live within 500 feet of the Whaley House, so I have to recuse myself.
Thank you, Peter. I think, do you wait over there? Yeah.
I timed my presentation earlier. It was about 18 minutes. So Commissioner Lehman, you'll be back there for at least 20 minutes. Apologies in advance. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. So we are here tonight to talk about a project here at 1395 H Street, the intersection of H and 14th Streets in Arcata. The site is zoned residential low density. It has a historic combining zone as well to protect the resource on the site. And the applicant team, it's kind of a more robust team than typical. We have one of the applicants here with us this evening, Nick Lucchese, as well as Ali and Sean Tonson. I believe at least one of them is joining by Zoom, and they are the current property owners of the site. And the historian, Bill Hull, is present as well if you have any questions for him. So this is just a vicinity map of the site showing where it is sort of in proximity to the university, close to downtown, a prime infill location in the Northtown area, Arcata Heights. And this is a satellite view of the parcel. You can see it is pretty large. It has a significant side yard, which we will talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. And the site is almost subdividable to meet current lot standards. It's 11,577 square feet. It would need to be 12,000 in order to typically subdivide. It has 100 feet of frontage along H Street. And there are a couple of constraints on the site, kind of unusual site features. One is the presence of this historic landmark property. It is a local historic landmark and a national landmark project site as well, and it was listed in the 70s, one of about 10 in our community. And it also falls within the mapped Alquist Priolo fault zone based on our hazards map adopted with the general plan, but a site-specific evaluation was done a couple of years ago, and it was cleared and approved by the city. So the request tonight revolves around interest in splitting the lot into two, having one lot that retains the structure and then another which would be essentially vacant and eligible for development. Because the lot is undersized, it got wrapped up in a fair amount of procedure, which we will kind of unspool tonight. So in addition to needing a tentative map for a minor subdivision, it also required a planned development permit for deviations to site standards. And there also is discussion in the packet about the planned rehabilitation of this structure and also planned future development of a single family residence and likely also an accessory unit on the resultant lot. So this is just to show you how large the parcel is from the street frontage. Again, it's about 100 feet with a large, primarily vacant side yard. So the Whaley House is early settlement, as noted by our speaker this evening. It is one of the oldest still existent examples of settlement era architecture in the city, one of 5 that remain. It was moved from its original location up the road at 918 14th Street in 1903. And as I mentioned, it's listed both on the local register and on the National Register of Historic Places. And there is a large body of general plan policy that supports preservation of these resources at this time. So again, the intent is to split the lot into 2, and it's very explicit in the application that the income from the sale of the resultant lot is going to be used to support rehabilitation of the structure. And the request is to split the lot into 2, one 6,039 square feet with about 52 feet of frontage, and the second into a 5,463 square foot lot with 47 feet of frontage. And this is a look at the tentative map that has been submitted from the applicants. And you'll notice that kind of on the left-hand side, there is a garage that is bisected by the property line, but I will be discussing that. So if you have questions about that, I will address it. So the proposed scope of work that is tied explicitly to the approval before you tonight is 1 through 8 listed on this slide. It is possible that the applicants will be doing more, but this is sort of the minimum to ensure the ongoing structural integrity of the resource that the applicants are committing to as part of this process. So it's kind of a mix of more structural work, including replacing underfloor beams and work associated with the foundation, and then more exterior aesthetic work as well, including painting and removal of non-historic additions, meaning pipe flues and other minor things, not removal of large additions. And these are some additional photos that were shared by the applicant, just showing that the structure is in fair condition, but it needs a fair amount of work to bring it into better repair and just to ensure the ongoing health of the structure. So the requested deviations are all relatively minor. The largest one is just the deviation from minimum lot size. It's only about 500 square feet under our minimum. And you can see, just kind of eyeballing it, that it looks like a typical city lot. And this neighborhood has many other substandard lots in the vicinity. The minimum frontage is also requested to be reduced from 60 feet to as low as 47 feet. I will note that in the land use code as it's currently written, a reduction to as low as 30 feet can be authorized with findings made by the decision makers. So that one is really not that far off of our typical process. And then for site coverage and floor area ratio, in order to allow the applicant to have a little bit of flexibility in the build out of the resultant lot, staff is proposing that we increase these 2 standards from 50% to 60%, given that they are substandard lots. So to give a little background on why this project requires a plan development permit, generally, if we're modifying site standards, there is a easier and more streamlined process through a design review, minor modification to site standards. But for subdivisions, because that is sort of a more significant action with more significant implications for development potential, the subdivision standards require a plan development permit very explicitly in the land use code. And this plan development type, there are types A, B, and C, is a type B plan development permit, which is used for uses that are permitted outright in the zone district. So this is purely a residential project in a residential zone, but it does require exceptions to the code. And the process exists because we know and acknowledge that not every project can adhere to every standard. We want to create that flexibility and ensure that for deviations from standards, we have sort of a balancing where there is public benefit, and it is intended to basically authorize better, higher quality projects than would be able to be authorized through a very strict application of the code. That being said, there are some kind of downsides to this process as well. Most importantly, it is expensive and it does involve a fair amount of process because creation of a new plan development overlay requires a zoning map amendment that has to be approved by the city council. So your action tonight is to adopt a resolution to recommend it to the city council. You're not the decision maker for tonight's project, just to be clear on that. Another thing that can sometimes trip up applicants is that for any modifications to a project that receives a plan development permit, the amendments need to go back to the original hearing body. So in this case, if we didn't make an explicit carve out for future development on the resultant parcel 2, the applicant would have to go back to the city council to develop a single family home in a single family zone. So that's something that we recommend avoiding and including in the scope of the project now. And finally, the plan development, because it is supposed to have this exchange of benefit, it can be pretty stringent in the types of amenities that are required in order to qualify for a project where only minor deviations are requested. Sometimes it can be hard to balance. In this case, the amenity that staff is finding is improvements to a historic resource, which is a priority of the city based on general plan policy. So that's kind of the background, and now I'm going to dive into the actual sort of like nitty-gritty of what is going to happen in order to approve this project. So first of all, we have to modify the zoning map to modify the existing historic landmark combining zone overlay. Currently, it covers the entirety of the parcel. Because the parcel boundary is changing, we need to modify it to only affect the parcel that will still house the Whaley House. And secondly, we need to create an additional new plan development combining zone that will cover both resultant parcels, tying them to the development plan, development proposal that's being proposed now. So there is a fair amount of process involved, and the ordinances that will do this work are included in your packet in draft form. They may change slightly through legal review, but we wanted to give you a sense of generally the format that those ordinances would take to do this work to the zoning map. And then further, the plot thickens further because the original landmark overlay that created protections for this structure explicitly called out the ample side yard as being potentially significant to the structure, which is, as far as we know, unique. Typically, features of the surrounding property are not wrapped into the features to be preserved so explicitly in the ordinance. And we took this to the Historic Landmarks Committee to get their read on it, and they supported staff's recommendation to essentially strike this section of the language from the features to be preserved. Finding that it was sort of an overreach, and the way the language was written, and the fact that the structure had been moved to the site and was not originally even built on the site supported the applicant's request to move forward with the lot split and future development of the site. And generally, I will also note that the Landmarks Committee was very supportive of this project. Taken holistically as a whole, it is supporting the intent of historic preservation policy in the city and does kind of the work that needs to happen to rehabilitate a significant resource. And to delve a little bit more into the plan development procedural piece for future development of resultant parcel 2, we wanted to ensure, like I mentioned previously, that the development of a single family residence would not require the applicant to go back to the city council. So we have structured the action to authorize more minor deviations than would typically be authorized through a plan development permit to build in that flexibility. And then finally, some other key project conditions that are important to note. Like I mentioned previously, we are going to explicitly tie the scope of work that was proposed to the plan development permit as sort of that public amenity, and the applicant will be required to adhere to it. We also are requiring a reciprocal maintenance agreement and installation of a firewall in this garage that splits the property line. And then finally, the building official will be able to weigh in on if further soil investigation will be required beyond what's already taken place at the site. And just to kind of speak to what the action states about how this project meets city goals and policies, I think it hits a lot of sort of the main policy areas that are a priority for the city right now, especially creating infill housing within the city's urban core. And I think it's important to note that this is not only rehabilitation of a historic resource, but also rehabilitation of 3 existing low, moderate income units that are in the city in close walking distance to the university and to the downtown. And preservation of resources like this has been a priority of the city for a long time and continues to be reflected in our general plan policy as we recently readopted. So that is important to note as well. So on the whole, this project doesn't meet every single standard of the code perfectly, but speaks really strongly to a lot of the policies and intent of our general plan. And one final note to the policy implications section of the report, I just wanted to flag that the project applicants came into the counter maybe 3 years ago trying to explore if they could use SB 9, which is the state lot split provisions, which you may be familiar with, which basically streamlines a lot of minor subdivisions and reduces our ability to condition or deny them. There is a carve out in state law for parcels that have historic resources on them. If that wasn't the case, this would have completely been authorized through SB 9 already. And in addition to that, when we are looking to update the land use code over the next year or two, one thing that staff will likely be bringing forward is reductions in minimum parcel size. This project would likely qualify for just a typical subdivision in that case as well. So based on the timing and the context, this project required a fair amount of process and time. But if the conditions were just slightly tweaked, it would likely have been approved ministerially. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we review updates to the land use code. So I will turn it back to the commission for any questions, and this is our recommended motion if anyone is ready to make it.
And if I could just add one more thing to the discussion. I know this wasn't initially part of the staff report, but I did want to address comments around the land acknowledgement just briefly. And to let the planning commission and the community know that the land acknowledgement. I understand there's perceptions are important, and the history is important, and the history of the development of the land acknowledgement I think is also important. The city's land acknowledgement was developed in consultation with the Wiyot people. And the language that's in it was agreed upon by the Wiyot tribe and approved for its use. And it's not just something that the city reads at the beginnings of meetings. I understand it can feel performative, but I think it's a statement that we reiterate at the beginnings of these meetings to reinforce the city's commitment to working with the Wiyot people and the Wiyot area tribes. We have several points of coordination and collaboration with the Wiyot tribe in many different areas. Those include sea level rise planning, cultural resources management, habitat restoration, and development coordination, just to name a few. And, further, I just wanted to, reinforce to the commission that the land acknowledgement does not claim that its intention is to take all actions to dismantle the legacy of settler colonialism. And it also doesn't claim that we will take no action that might preserve or reiterate, reiterate Arcata's history. It's not one of the findings that you're making tonight, but I do think that it's important to recognize that that at the end of the day, the land acknowledgement is not in conflict with these actions that the commission is taking. And I'd encourage folks to reach out to our office if they want to learn more about the history of the land acknowledgement and the other work that we're doing with the Wiat peoples, or if they want to provide comment to us about things that we should be doing. We're always open to those. So before you take your action tonight, I just wanted to reinforce that your action is not inconsistent with the land acknowledgement that you've read at the beginning of this meeting.
Thank you, David. Do we have questions on the staff report from commissioners? Yeah.
Just for clarification, as I think I heard you say, they could have utilized SB 9 if it wasn't a historic resource, and the other glitch was that it was below our minimum size, lot size, right? Both of those?
Only the first one, the presence of a historic landmark, would have precluded them from using SB 9. So SB 9 allows you to subdivide as small as, I think, like 1,200 square feet. It could easily have qualified for SB 9 based on the lot size.
Okay, so even if it goes against what the city's commitment to lot size is, correct? Okay.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Do you want to make your comment, or would you like to hold it till after? Yeah. Okay. Any further questions before I open up to public comment? Okay. I'll ask my question now. So in our general plan, we have policy LU-8, which is to consider upzoning this in other neighborhoods in the future. Does that come into conversation with the property owner or planners as they're thinking about proposed projects like this? I'm struck looking at this, that whatever structure ends up getting built there could be there 100 years later. And so I'm just thinking about the timing of these sort of things.
Well, I will say that, and I'll let the applicant speak to what they want and why they want it, but they do have a specific vision for the site based on their needs. And that being said, we did build flexibility into the action under the modifications to site standards to authorize increases in density in the future if it's desired. So I believe the way it reads is any modifications to the site that would increase density up to local or state limits would be authorized without requiring us to open up this plan development again. So the intent was to allow for that if they desire it. Yeah. But beyond that, we haven't had explicit conversations with the applicant about wanting more units on site above what they've already indicated that they wanted.
I would also just add to that we're in this zone with a lot of different topics where we've indicated in our policy that we want to take some particular action. But folks who are coming in to do a project today are subject to the rules that are in our zoning codes. So this is a perfect example where, fast forward a year from now, they could have come in and proposed, more than likely, our staff recommendation will be to reduce the minimum lot size for residential low density zones. So even if there's no change to density in a residential low density zone, they would likely have been able to do this without a planned development permit in the future. And we are actually, I think the PD example here is a good reminder as we talk about our next topic on the agenda and as we move into these land use code amendments discussions. Like, think about all of the types of projects that have come before the Planning Commission that just don't seem to fit well with the policy we just adopted.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you guys had to do all this work on the staff report, and hey, while we're here changing the rules for things, we've also talked about this area as a potential. I think it's great that they want to do this amount of infill. I would like to see even more if possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, 100 years from now, it's hard to say, but there could always be internal conversions as well. I mean, the Whaley House has 3 units in it, so that's always an option.
Thanks. Okay, so with that, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Folks in person can line up at the lectern. Because this is a, wait, is it? Do I give the applicant the first? Yes.
Yes, yeah,
I did
typically the
promise
way,
them that.
yeah, the way we do it is that the applicant gets both the first and the last turn
Yeah.
at the mic in case they wish to rebut anything, and we give that opportunity to the applicant because of the quasi-judicial nature of the decision. It allows them sort of an opportunity to say anything to influence your decision once they've heard from the public.
Perfect. So the applicant is invited to speak first. They have unlimited time. And then the general public can speak for 3 minutes each. And then the applicant can respond to any comments that were made by the general public. And then if you're online, please raise your hand or press *9. All right, with that, I will open it up.
My name's Nick Lucchese, and I'm one of the partners of Pacific Builders here in Arcata. First of all, I wanted to thank Dilo and David for their willingness and helpfulness in getting this off the ground and stuff and everything. They've been amazing. I just want to let you know how well they've done it for us. I was out of town, and Dilo even did one of my postings for me because I couldn't be here to do it and stuff. So thank you so much. I think most about what the project involves has been covered in the report. I wanted to give you a little bit of more of a human side of it, the history of how we got here. The Thompson family has owned it since the 70s, the house since the 70s. And at one point there were some plans for their mother to build a house there in the 70s and 80s, and the chief passed away since then. They don't live here. They live in Southern California. They're from here, or Sean was, but they don't live here anymore. But he still has kept the house and the family all this time. So they approached me with the idea that they wanted to make some improvements to the house. They didn't know what they could afford, and they wanted to sell the lot, split it off, and get the money to do the work on it. So they did the Alcatraz Priolo investigation. That was part of that ramp up to getting to where we are today. And so I did a bunch of budgeting for them and this and that and the other thing, what we could afford to do. At one point there was talk of adding a 4th unit, and that got to be too expensive. It wasn't possible to do as far as the other stuff they wanted to do. So the direction that I got from them was, we want to make this house shine here on the corner. We want it upgraded. It's been allowed to get run down a bit like houses do over 20 years since the last time it had any exterior work. So I took it from there, looked into what it needed structurally and cosmetically in order to make that happen. And in the meantime, my wife and I decided, well, if they're selling that lot, we'd like to buy it because we live in the country on a large parcel, and what I do on Saturday mornings is get up and put my work clothes on and stuff, and that can't go on forever. So one of these days we're going to move to town. So if this is a successful action here and with the city council, then we'll see you next year with some house plans, basically. So the outside of the house has 2 kinds of siding on it, which reflects the history of it, which Bill will cover. Why they moved that house 1.5 blocks, it must have been a lot of trouble, and I don't know why they did that. I'd love to find that out someday, but we'll never know that. There's 2 kinds of siding on it, and the western end of it is patched onto the other part of the house, and it has a more narrow siding on it than the rest of it. So that was put on and had some windows patched in sort of clumsily. We're going to remill siding to match that and do a better job, clean that all up so that siding looks good. And we're going to leave the other siding the way it is because the history of the building is that it had 2 kinds of siding on it, so we're not going to change that. And then the whole house gets scraped down, sanded, and painted, so a quality paint job on the whole thing. The skirting boards around the outside need to be replaced. They've been beat up by mowing and stuff around the outside. And the rest of the list is that you're familiar with that they put on there. Those are the required things. The garage is not part of the historical structure thing, but it is over 100 years old. And the original plan was to cut the end of the garage off to make the property line. But in order to avoid controversy and also to gain a garden shed, we decided to run the property line through it. We have to build two firewalls there to make it a separate, technically, legally a separate building. And then put a door and a window on the inside so we can use it as a garden shed. Everybody's on the same side here. The Thompsons want it to look like a nice house coming down the street so that it's a credit to the community. That's what we want to do. And then we want to build a house next door to it someday. We want something nice looking next to it. So the city gets out of this 2 new housing units in the downtown area, and we're going to build something nice when we build there in any case. So this is our town where we want to make it look nice, just as if it was yours. That's about covers the history of the project. Everything else is so thoroughly done in Dilo's report that I think that if you have any questions for me, let me know. Otherwise, I'll leave it to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll open it up for general public comment. Please line up at the lectern.
Hi, my name's Joanne McGarry, and I walk a lot through Arcata, and I know this house and some of the other houses of this era, and also the history of this era. And I just want to say my experience having been a park ranger, a national park ranger in the San Francisco Presidio, it is an area that has histories from many eras, including the original people of the San Francisco Bay, the Ohlone people. And when I was a ranger there, I learned the histories of many, including the architecture of many of the different eras. And I think the preservation of something like this is important. I think, the right history telling of these types of architectural structures is really important. I'm appreciating the fact that we're talking about moving into the future and having additional structure next door, hopefully will be appropriate. I think of places 100 years from now, people will say about Sorrel Place or Plaza Point or anything that maybe pops up in the Gateway District, what were they thinking or why did they do this? So I'm basically just saying I understand and appreciate the preservation aspect and what's being asked for here. And I also appreciate what the gentleman said earlier. So I just think we can understand how things evolve and times are different. And as long as we have an understanding of it all, I just really think that's primarily important on this matter. And I look forward to keep walking by and seeing the changes that are made to this structure.
Hi, everyone. Just a little bit about me. My name is Melissa Spandry. I work for the Cherry Heights Indian community of the Trinidad Rancheria, and I am also a resident of 1395 H Street. I live in the front house right there. I'm here tonight to speak in support of this resolution, however, with some hesitations. But just again, to give a little backstory, 3 years ago, after graduating from Cal State University, Monterey Bay, I moved to Arcata searching for a new chapter in my life. What I found here was much more than a place to live. I found peace, found my community, and honestly a true sense of home. The Whaley residence has been a huge part of that experience. Even though I am the only one living there now in the front house section, the house has been filled with memories, friendships, and roommates who became lifelong friends. There is something incredibly special about this home, and it carries history in a way that you can actually feel it when you walk through it every day. As some of you may not know, the house itself was built by settler John A. Whaley and his wife Emily Coffin southward in the 1850s, and remains one of the few surviving homes from Arcata's earliest years. One meaningful detail I discovered after moving in is that following John A. Whaley's passing, his wife Emily eventually relocated to Hollister, California, where she passed away in 1911. Coincidentally, Hollister also happens to be the town that I was born and raised in. Learning that created an unexpected and deeply personal connection for me and made this historic home feel much more special. I often find myself hoping that Emily would be proud to know that the home she helped build is still being cared for and deeply loved today. That is why I do support the rehabilitation efforts proposed in this resolution, but I do have some hesitations between separating it into two parcels. I understand it's necessary, as the speaker before me previously said, to preserve it, but I also want it to remain lived in and cared for. It seems that the line where we would be cutting and separating those two parcels would be taking out a significant part of my backyard, which I do have a garden in. I do tend for it. While I sincerely hope to continue living there for a very long time, I also understand that projects like this can bring change. And even so, I believe deeply in preserving this home and protecting its future. My hope is that this process can move forward in a way that honors the home's history, respects the people who live and care for it today, and allows future generations to continue experiencing a place that means so much to me and this community. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I greatly appreciate it.
Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Do we have anyone with their hand raised online? Okay, I am going to close public comment and open it up for a discussion among us. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think I had similar sentiments to our initial speaker when going through some of this documentation. I think that there's an awful lot of labor and time and resources that are put into the reviewing of all of this historical documentation, and even reading some of the historical documentation of the land that was discovered by these people is kind of like upsetting to me as someone who works with tribes across the state of California. And I obviously know that when those documents were created, our understanding of settling these places was very different than it is today. And so I think I just, in relation to this project and our next agenda item, really want to encourage a streamline of historical review processes, because to me this seems like an enormous amount of labor put into the preservation of this like colonial history. And while architecturally I do appreciate that there is an immense amount of like care taken into constructing this building when it was built compared to how we build things today, which is like pretty cheap materials and probably won't be lasting as long as a house like this. So, I think I'm interested in increasing the density on this lot and what the project is proposing. I like that it is already subdivided into rental units. And I think my largest comment here is just, this is so much labor for like really the benefit of adding more density to Arcata, which is the overall goal of this commission and the staff and everything we're doing. And so I just like, to the tune of, let's just get it done quicker, add more density, not make it such a hurdle. Like, please, yes, let's go.
Thank you. Yeah, Dan.
I think it's a beautiful house, and I live in a house that is on our local historic list, and I take a lot of pride in preserving the architecture of it. I love the era, just architecturally, particularly this example. I just think it's a beautiful house. And I respect the importance that the family is putting on sinking some real money into preserving this house. I know how fragile, wonderful materials, except that they're also very fragile and vulnerable over time. So I like the project. I like the infill, and I think we should move forward with a motion and send it to the city council.
In the staff report, there was that, original application for listing in the historic registry that has some of the, Arcata was discovered by. Does that ever get updated, or is that just the history once it's in the register is the history that was there?
The latter, yeah.
Okay.
So that was done in the 70s.
Yeah.
There were, a few dated things in it, but it is unlikely to be changed.
Okay.
I will say that the applicant team did reach out to the National Register, and they did confirm that modifications to the actual physical boundaries of the lot are at the discretion of the local jurisdiction, and they didn't have any issue with that.
I also want to, because the conversation's coming up now, remind the Planning Commission that we're working on the Arcata's historic context. And, not that we won't make some, some language errors in the current iteration, but we're in the process of updating our context statement. And, hopefully those, will be used in future listings or, pointed to as we, continue to talk about the history of Arcata. And I think we do it a little bit more sensitively in that document than we did maybe in these, 1980s era, 1990s era documents.
Thank you. Abby, do you have any comments or?
I just want to second what Ashton said. And also it is a beautiful house, and increasing density it's one of our main goals. And so I'm also supportive of this project.
Okay, so I think I've heard 3 supports. I'm also in support. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Yeah, I will. I move to adopt resolution number PC 26-03, recommending approval of the Whaley House Plan Development Zone Amendment, Landmark Ordinance Amendment, and Plan Development Permit and Lot Split.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that item is closed. Congratulations. Well, congratulations on the first half, right? Okay, tonight we have one business item, which is to consider recommendations for amendments to the Land Use Code consistent with General Plan 2045. May we please begin with a staff report?
All right, yeah. Thank you, Chair. We do have our consulting team on with us tonight as well. And when we get started here, we'll have them introduce themselves. But tonight's business item is essentially the preliminary step in some of the land use code changes that we'll be making to consistify the general plan work that we just adopted in 2024 and our land use code. So we want to update that. In your staff report, we've provided some of the preliminary work that Lisa Weiss Consulting has done for us to point us in that direction. We're going to have them come on and make a presentation, and then we'll hopefully get the Planning Commission's creative juices flowing, and we'll start having a robust conversation about these. We'll do that both tonight and on May 26th. And as you all know, the City Council watches each and every one of your Planning Commission meetings. So the idea here is that the City Council will be able to hear your deliberations, kind of key into what you think the priority topics are, and they'll also have a couple of weeks to digest the material that's in the packet before your joint study session with them on June 8th. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our consulting team, and I believe Monica, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, David, and good evening, Planning Commissioners. I'm Monica Sisilic, project manager here at LWC, and I'm joined by my colleagues Jennifer, Jaden, and Cal. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'll initiate this presentation.
There you go.
Great. Okay. All right. Okay, I'll move on to the agenda. So I'll quickly introduce our project team, the attendees tonight. I'll introduce the project, a brief overview of the background of the project and why we're here, and the context, and our objectives, also our timeline for meeting those objectives. And I'll talk a little bit about the community outreach we've conducted so far. I'll present briefly some of the material that's in your packet, namely our analysis and recommendations memo. And then the most important part, we want to hear from you about our efforts so far. So this is very much a team effort, this project. We've been working closely with David, Jennifer, and Dilo at the city. And on our part, I'm Monica. As I mentioned, joined by Jennifer, Cal, and Jaden of El Delusi. We are a land use, planning, consulting, implementation, and consulting firm, and we do planning all over the state of California. We do a lot of housing elements, code updates, and all things related to zoning codes and planning, really. Comprehensive code updates are really our target project, and we're very excited to be here working with you. And on our team also is GHD, not present tonight, but they are very much part of our team. They'll be heading the environmental review needed for our products and also involved in community outreach. Some of our partners at GHD are in fact local in the Arcata area. Okay, so big picture, we are here to implement your new general plan, the general plan 2045. So there's lots of good policies, lots of good direction in this general plan, and that is really the occasion for updating the city's municipal code title 9, which is the land use code. So some of the changes that we're focusing on are, of course, some of the same items that are changing in codes all across California due to changes in state law, right? So the changes in new policies in your general plan, some are very local, homegrown, and a lot of them are consistent with what cities all over California are doing, and we'll be handling all of the above. It has a lot to do with housing, right? SB 9, ADU, simplifying permitting, and generally being consistent with state law. Part of our project is also developing a form-based code just for the Valley West infill area, somewhat similar to the recent efforts that the city has undertaken for the Gateway area. We'll be looking very specifically at the Valley West area and developing a form-based code and conducting a bit more community outreach for that effort. We'll be completing the required environmental review for both the comprehensive code update and the form-based code, and of course this is a comprehensive code update. So like a lot of codes we work with, yours hasn't been updated comprehensively in a long time. So we'll be recommending some general changes for usability and clarity to make it easier for applicants and also for staff to rely on for project review and processing. So we know that you, as a planning commission, know a lot about zoning. So briefly, we'll just as sort of a reminder to the community what zoning does and doesn't do. So zoning can and does clarify the types of buildings that are allowed and their overall placement and form. It identifies permitted, conditionally permitted, or prohibited uses and where. It facilitates land use compatibility through performance standards that address health, safety, and welfare, but also character through design standards, which is a new part of sort of new content in your code. It sets review requirements and procedures. And it also provides the predictability, it strikes the balance between predictability and flexibility, making sure that the procedures are predictable enough for the community, but also allow the right amount of flexibility for applicants and designers. Zoning does not dictate architectural style. It can improve physical character, but doesn't dictate style. It can't determine exact mixes of tenants and private development. It's an implementation tool. It doesn't set policy. We're looking at the policy in your general plan. It doesn't make density or desired uses less expensive by shifting cost burdens of externalities. Okay, a little bit about what we're starting with. The background here in Arcata, we're looking primarily at the general plan, 2045, and its CIR. And we'll be consistent with the review that's already being conducted. The sixth cycle housing element is, of course, sets the marching orders for a lot of the housing policy. And we're starting with a robust set of development standards, of zoning standards to begin with. So we're not starting from scratch. We're updating the code. And we're looking at new planning efforts that you have on the books. So we'll be taking a close look at the Gateway Area Plan and Form-Based Code and other planning documents that offer guidance and vision for the city as a whole or for certain areas of the city. We are not working all alone. This effort is very much a part of concurrent and related to concurrent efforts. So that includes a local coastal program. We're in the process of reviewing that new document. We are working with the Reconnecting Arcata project. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And we're cognizant of the Economic Development Strategic Plan and the next housing element, which will start very soon. Everything will be in agreement. Our project timeline. So you can see we started this effort late last year, and we anticipate going through the end of next year. So we kicked off the project. We had some stakeholder interviews. We drafted the memo that's in your packet. And now here we are at the first of 3 study sessions you can see here in task 2. So there's a lot of shapes and dots on this slide, but generally speaking, tasks 2 and 3 are the comprehensive code update, and it'll do a lot of things, right? It will implement the general plan. Sort of if you squint, in a nutshell, we will be supporting infill housing and mixed-use development, which is really the emphasis of the general plan, and the density and design and land use policy changes in it. We will be simplifying the uses and streamlining the uses and the permit standards because we understand that there is a need for that. There's a desire to simplify and streamline those processes. And generally, we'll be improving the code usability based on what we understand from the staff and community or your needs, and also bringing to it our experience with implementing best practices and codes all across the state and across the country, really. Task 4 is a bit of a phase 2. We'll be kicking that off actually very soon, and then the bulk of that effort will happen after the comprehensive code update, looking at form and design in the public realm in the Valley West area, with an emphasis on outreach there. Okay, so I mentioned we did begin with stakeholder interviews because we are deep in the code update findings and recommendations and beginning to draft it. So we held interviews in February of this year. We talked to 9 code users, people familiar with the code, and we heard a lot of great input, and it's hard to distill it down to a couple of bullet points, but generally speaking, we heard that the code is working well for those who are familiar with it, and there's a lot in it, a lot of guidance, and users can find what they need, and the gateway code is nice and flexible. We also understood that there are some conflicts between the code and other authorities, essentially. Some of the standards don't really work, and especially considering new general plan densities and policies, we'll make them work, but we'll make them work along with to implement the general plan. We understand that there's some predictability that could be injected into the code, that the standards feels subjective, or there's some uncertainty on the part of the applicants. And then we asked the interviewees a little bit about Valley West, and we heard that yes, we would like it to be walkable, better connected, a better mix of uses. The complete write-up of the stakeholder interviews is also included in your packet. So you noticed on the schedule slide, we had a couple of dots in a row. Tonight, we are here introducing the project and our initial memo, and we want to talk about some big picture policy direction. We'll be doing the same thing in 2 weeks. And I'm going to jump down to the fourth bullet. We'll also be doing something similar, talking about the project, getting information from the Joint Planning Commission and Council in early June. Everything we'll need to develop the first draft, our administrative draft of the code. Looking at the third bullet, we are kicking off already that task 4, that Valley West, largely because of the Reconnecting Arcata effort. We'll be holding an open house in a couple of weeks, and so we are pulling material together to be at that open house and kick off the outreach portion of the Valley West. And we're talking about a lot of the same issues with the comprehensive code update as well as Valley West. So it's a great opportunity to to let the community know that we're beginning this project. So we've got a lot going here in the next month. So we're going to pause right here. And I'd like to, well, first hand the presentation back over to staff to fill in anything about the project background and objectives that we talked about, and then leave some space for discussion questions about the slides so far.
Yeah, so this is really just an opportunity to ask questions about the big picture that we've gone over so far, and then we have more detailed content to get into. I'm not seeing any. We don't have any questions, Monica. Let's go ahead and roll forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll take a closer look at the material that's in your packet, specifically the analysis and recommendations memo. So we just dug deep into sort of some of these background documents that we looked at a moment ago, and the initial sort of information and sort of wish list of ideas that we received from staff and talked through with them. So to put it out on to document sort of what we see, what our initial recommendations are, talk about that with you, and then we'll use all of that material to all of that input to develop the admin draft. So generally speaking, this document reviewed existing zoning standards. That's what we're starting with. Looked at all of the general plan policies, and there are a whole lot, but we identified the ones that can and should be and will be specifically implemented through the zoning code. A lot of them can't be implemented with the zoning code, but we looked at the ones that can. We identified where it needs to be consistent with state law, how we anticipate and what ways we'd like to update the procedures and permitting portions of the code, and then bigger picture updates for recommendations for updates. So stepping back a bit, as we've said, our starting point is the General Plan 2045 and all of the good direction in it. So this is the General Plan land use map. So there are some differences between this and the previous zoning map. We understand that this land use map then was adopted as the new zoning map as well. So the same map is now the zoning map. And the changes really, there are a handful of changes all over the city, but if we distill it down to a couple of major change areas. Up at the northern part of the city, some areas that were previously zoned commercial visitor servicing and commercial general are now commercial mixed use per your general plan and now your zoning map. Some residential areas got sort of bumped up a notch in density categories. The gateway area, generally speaking, moved away from industrial land use designations and zones to commercial mixed with some natural resources. And then over here in the downtown core, we went from CG to CM and then up a notch in density. So whereas the color, it might not be a huge change in terms of colors, it really does mean something in terms of the nature of the land use, what's happening, the densities, and what we'd like development to look like. So that's what we're sort of digging into here. Okay, so now we looked carefully at the general plan. There's a lot of policies, but you'll see a handful of these are bolded. This is where we found a lot of policies that can and should be implemented through the zoning code. So that's land use, circulation, housing, that's your housing element, right? A new chapter called design, where there's all kinds of good direction on building design. We're looking very closely at that. Historic preservation, and then also a new health element. I mentioned we picked out every single policy that really is our marching orders. And so in your packet, there's an appendix. This is maybe a 10 or 12 page table where we documented the policy, the text, and then what we plan to do about it. There's a lot here. There's a whole lot of policy direction. In general, if we had to distill it down to a couple of bullets, the general plan tells us to prioritize higher density infill and mixed use development, to introduce a robust set of design standards, to update citywide standards. These are standards that apply throughout the city that are independent of zone, specifically to support this added density. And then the procedures again.
And I do just want to acknowledge on the packet, the print at a 8.5 by 11 is way too small to read those tables. I'm hopeful that the electronic versions that you all got were large enough to review, but if they weren't, please let me know and we'll send out full-size copies of those.
Great, thanks. Okay, so then if you go back into the body of the report, we've got recommendations that are generally in six categories. So we'll go through sort of the big picture recommendations for these, and then we welcome your input on all of them, general and specific. Okay, so uses are really at the heart of the code, right? So there's a lot of direction in the general plan about uses. There are not only 5 policies, but a sort of a representative set of those are what you see here. Generally speaking, the general plan tells us to encourage housing while also retaining ground floor commercial, to support healthy uses in mixed use and commercial areas, to allow flexibility in an effort to support active frontages and active neighborhoods and livable communities, to support local agricultural projects in these uses, and to think about uses that will support, retain, expand all kinds of jobs, including living wage jobs, light industrial jobs of a light industrial nature. So these are just a few examples of generally the kinds of changes that we're looking to support in the code. Okay,
I'm sorry, can I jump in real quick, Monica? Maybe go back a slide. I just wanted to pause, and as we go through each of these 6 different categories, if the commission or commissioners have topics that they wanted to bring up, my hope is that we can, do like a light touch as we're going through the rest of the presentation, but then we can also come back after that and get into more in-depth deliberations. And I'm happy to take notes if there are specific topics around uses, zone standards, citywide standards, et cetera, that you wish to come back to. So anything in particular on uses that you want to air right now or just get on the list, be happy to take those.
Can I ask a procedural question? In 2 weeks, we're going to have a similar presentation and a similar discussion. Is that correct?
The idea is that this is the background for your discussions that we'll have tonight and that will continue in 2 weeks. So the idea is not necessarily to have another presentation in 2 weeks and preserve the majority of that meeting for deliberations. This is to prime the pump. And then once we get the Planning Commission creative juices flowing after that pump is primed, the idea will be that these two conversations on May 12th and May 26th inform your conversations with the council on June 8th.
Yeah, so anyone feel free to jump in with comments or questions, but I also think maybe we should just get through the presentation and then we can jump into a more robust discussion with what time we have left.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So thinking about uses and especially the changes that we highlighted on the previous slide that showed the map, we have to be cognizant of the fact that where the land use designation is changing, that means the range of allowed uses will also be that are on a parcel in an area that's changing. That list of uses is also changing. So that means that we're introducing new mixes, new adjacencies that were previously not allowed. So we want to be aware of that. We want to support the kinds of development and uses that we want to see, but we want to be careful of if suddenly a new use is allowed and it wasn't previously, then what does that mean for the how to regulate those uses and also the standards, the zone standards. So the next sort of article of the code is the zone standards. So we establish the base zones, and as we saw, it's a one-to-one correspondence between the general plan and the zone and the zones. They are one and the same. We'll update the combining zones as well. To implement, to meet community needs and implement policies. But really the focus is the development standards by zone. So we'll update them to support the changes that are described in the general plan. And we'll have figures to demonstrate, to explain, and help visualize the standards. And as we do that, we'll test it out to make sure that they all work, that they lead to feasible development that that is demonstrative of the character that the general plan describes. Design standards, so we noted that you've got a new element in your general plan all about design. So we'll be bringing those design standards into this Article 2 of the code. And we'll be addressing all of these items bulleted here, at least these items bulleted here, and really we want to hear from you which of these or others are most important to you. And we have some indication through a lot of general plan policies, but we also, as we start to test them out, we want to hear from you and the community about what do you like, what does work, what's right for what areas of Arcata. So we'll be looking at upper story step backs, how to shave down if needed, if desired, upper portions of buildings. We'll look at the bottom, the base, middle, and top of the buildings. We'll look at architectural details, windows, doors, materials, and colors. This can be the allowed materials, the prohibited materials, or both. And then building configuration. So for higher density buildings, parking is at the center of all building design, right? So what is that configuration like? How do we steer the design of buildings with structured parking? And how do we make sure that it looks nice from the right of way? Okay, citywide standards. There's also a lot of direction in your general plan about standards that are not specific to any one zone. So we're looking at like fences and walls and parking and signs. We know we want to put a lot of thought into allowed encroachments into required setbacks. So we want to get that just right. Also, there's a lot in there about landscaping. And hillside development as well. So we'll update that as needed. We'll be recommending that we remove parts of the code that, well, they're there in the zoning code, but they're not reviewed by the planning staff, they're not administered by planning, or maybe they're not used at all. Maybe they're outdated. Or best practices tell us that they're most effective when elsewhere in the municipal code. So we'll be looking at all of that and seeking direction and guidance from you on those as we get into the specifics. Procedures. So, simply put, we want to take all the permits that are issued by and reviewed by the planning department and put them in one chapter and make sure that the procedural, the noticing, hearings, that it's laid out in a consistent way. We want to make sure that there's a permit for everything that warrants a permit. To the extent that we can make things easier and smoother by adding permits, we certainly do that. We'll update findings and applicability. We understand that there's room for improvement in the design review permit, in the plan development. Really, what do we want that for? And make sure that we get it just right. We'll also be updating the environmental review to make sure it's consistent with state law and also needs identified by staff.
Just wanted to check in. Are there any questions for commissioners real quick?
Yeah, I think it was on citywide standards. These sections we're removing, it's because they're duplicative and they're in other sections of the code. Is that like the shorthand way of thinking about this?
Yeah, there's a couple of different reasons for the suggestion to take a look at these sections. Many of them are either in other codes, building code or municipal code. And some of them conflict with those other codes. And then also, part of the effort here is to make the zoning code purely about zoning and land use, and then to take those, resource sections and move them into portions of the municipal code where, our partners in engineering or environmental services typically look for, their purview over both, projects that they're conducting, so city projects, or projects that they're reviewing, private projects that are coming through, and they're looking to see, what standards apply. We've had this challenge in the past where, some of the codes that are in the land use code that really are the technical purview of those other departments sometimes get missed because they don't think to look in the land use code.
Yeah, that's really helpful. For future conversations of that, it would be really helpful to have the citation to the other part of the code that we are preserving this in, just so that people don't have the sense that we're getting
just
rid of
eliminating them.
Yeah.
That's really great point. When we get into the nitty-gritty detail on those, we will definitely map that onto what the recommendation is for either deleting it. So for example, our geologic and hazard review is duplicative of, it synthesizes a bunch of different areas of state law, and it's in some ways kind of nice to have it in one place, but the problem is that it doesn't stay current. And so right now our geologic and hazard review conflicts with current state law, and it conflicts with the building code. Same with provisions for, grading, erosion and sediment control, stormwater management. We've adopted so many documents in the intervening time since this land use code was adopted in 2008 that, some of these sections are just irrelevant.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And thank you.
Can I ask another clarifying question? Related to the zone standards, when you referred to coming up with some design standards for the city, I guess I'm curious from staff's perspective, the prompt for this, because I know that we've talked about kind of stepping that back a bit, and so this feels a bit different, and so kind of from staff's perspective, I would love to hear that where that's coming from.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess the long and short of it is the intent is to get more specific in order to release more control, I guess I would say. If we move more in the direction of objective design standards, it reduces subjectivity, gives more certainty, and allows us to reduce some of these processes that it sounds like the commission is supportive of eliminating. So the intent is not to create more process, it's to create less through clear standards.
I think those would also be applied to, we ultimately, the city council, can decide where they apply. So objective design standards, are they necessary for a single family home or a small apartment building that's being built? Maybe not. Are they, do they help us achieve our goals by doing them in, form-based code areas, the, gateway, for example, or, if we get single stair buildings, do we want to dictate what those look like ahead of time so that there aren't debates over, what we meant when we said you could do those kinds of projects, if that makes sense. So if we have objective design standards, we can point to them and say, yes, we said that a single stair building that's, 4 stories tall could be built on this, residential low density lot, as long as it meets these objective design standards. Does the project meet those objective design standards? Yes, then it's approved. No, then it's not.
And
so it eliminates process.
I do think that this is going to be one of the areas where there's clear intent in the policy, but the devil is really in the details in terms of how we administer the code for these things. And I'm guessing we're going to talk about it a lot, either, tonight or at future meetings.
On those design standards, do you feel like there's enough body of information already in the system, or is there going to be some coming up with new standards, and then do they have to come through us, or who? How does this unfold?
Yeah, one of the highlights in the procurement process that Lisa Weiss Consulting, was able to elevate for us was that, they really have a lot of design experience. And I think if you look at some of the, some of the drawings that are in your packet that they're proposing, we'll see a few as we get through the rest of this presentation. I think they're very simple to read and aesthetically pleasing, guidance that we'll be able to put into our land use code. And they really have the design experience. They have folks on their team that, have backgrounds in architecture and urban design. I think they're really going to be able to help us to think about what applies best in Arcata, in our community. So I don't think we yet have a real robust set of objective design standards. And I think, the ones that we adopted into the gateway code through this process, we may want to revisit those and rethink, what are we trying to accomplish with those? It was our first crack. The gateway code was really our first crack at objective design standards, and I think we did pretty well. But there's always going to be room for improvement.
And I'll also note that on page 87 of the packet, our consultant team kind of ran through what they gathered and culled from a variety of design guideline manuals and projects that the city has done over the last 50 years, including 5 design manuals from the 70s. So Arcata has been pretty focused on good design for decades, and so they have a fair amount of material to work from, and they pulled out some of their main takeaways from that review, and those are in your packet if you'd like to ask any questions about those.
Thank you, and I think we can continue with the presentation.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I will mention that since SB 330 was effective as of like January 2020, we've done a whole lot of objective design standards. We've also done a whole lot of comprehensive code updates, and since then they all include objective design standards because that's an important part of codes. Because we're on this slide, this bullet here, and if you can see my arrow, but standards for specific uses. It's right now it's your code section 942. So those are standards for, home occupations, the ADUs, childcare centers, specific uses. But your code currently does include small sections for mixed use projects and multifamily. So we're starting with something there, but what we'll do is move it into the zone standards, and we'll build on all of the guidance in your general plan, and then in the guidelines that you have on the books that the DLO just mentioned, that we dug into pretty deep to understand what the community has already documented as our design priorities. Okay, so let's move forward. Procedures, we talked about permits, applicability and finding, review. So we recommend, and we do this for all of our codes, we recommend, you have a glossary right now, but separating terms that are in the code versus that warrant definitions, defining, versus the list of uses. And those are the uses that appear in the use table and the uses that is on your use permit, right? Your permit when you, so we find it's helpful to separate them. So the uses that will be defined in the list of uses will be everything that is included in the use table and use tables, and only what's included in the use tables. We just recommend that for code administration in general. We would also recommend, we notice that there are some rules of measurement scattered throughout your code. Just pull all those and have a rules of measurement section that will deal with sort of some examples of what you see here. We also understood that there's we want to standardize how we round decimals, that kind of thing. So have one section for all rules of measurement and interpretations. And then lastly, we've got some ideas about format and usability. So we don't want to completely overhaul your code and make changes where no changes are needed because it's working fine. But we do want to have, for example, in every group of zones, one single table of development standards. For every group of zones, one use table that's very closely keyed with the definitions of uses in that part of the code. We want clear graphics that demonstrate one, not too many more than one specific standard at a time to make the code as crystal clear as we can, so that we know, what the standard is, why it's there, and what it's regulating. And so we have a couple of examples here of just how a code can be laid out. And then we like to use cross references. It just slims the code down, and it's using cross references just cuts down on ultimately errors and fix-its needed in the future. And that is the summary of the recommendations that are spelled out in the memo in your packet. And I'd like to turn it back over to David and staff so that we can start introducing some discussion questions that we've suggested, and anything else that the commissioners, you all would like to let us know.
Great. Well, We have these discussion questions in front of us. We also have not taken public comment on this item, and I imagine the public has thoughts on these things as well. So I think before we discuss, I'll open it up for public comment. If you're in person to give public comment on this item, please line up at the lectern. If you're online, please raise your hand or press *9. Each commenter will have 3 minutes.
Sylvia Van Ryan. I work for Humboldt Waterkeeper, which is a local environmental nonprofit. We work to safeguard the health of Humboldt Bay for the enjoyment of our local community. I worked with David a little bit on the local coastal elements outdoor lighting section, and I thought this would be, the land use code update would be an excellent opportunity to align the land use code for the rest of the city with the local coastal elements. So I had a couple suggestions for that. There's some specific language that came through the coastal zoning ordinance that was approved on March 4th, and I would love to see that carried through to the current land use code update. So specifically, that would be the standards outlined in section 2.14.080, outdoor lighting, subsection D. There's also an ESHA protection section in there. I think that that could absolutely be pulled through to the land use code if ESHA is not terminology that's used in the land use code. You could have it apply to similar land uses that might support ESHA, like parks, open space, and agriculture. In the city's current municipal code, section 9.30.070, outdoor lighting, there's an allowance for commercial and industrial properties to optionally follow the guidance of the I think it's like the Illuminating Engineers Society Handbook, which is an authoritative standard that Dark Sky International points to as well, but it's only applicable to commercial and industrial parking areas, and it's only when the review authority explicitly requires it. And I think that kind of leaves an opening for like building mounted lighting to kind of escape some of the outdoor lighting standards. So expanding that requirement to cover an entire property that's zoned as commercial or industrial, and then using the explicit, like applying the explicit language that comes from the coastal zoning ordinance would cut out that loophole. The coastal zoning ordinance language initially included parking lot language for the commercial and industrial properties, but that was struck at some point. So I think that would be great to carry through. Also, I think there's electronic signs are in the land use code update, and I suggest that that also have outdoor lighting standards applied to it. And one minor point as far as the general plan's suggestions, it references the crime prevention through environmental design principles, especially for outdoor lighting. The organization that publishes those has actually collaborated with Dark Sky International to identify that protecting the night sky and outdoor security are not in conflict. So it's possible to have both.
Thank you for your comment. And you submitted written comments as well that we can refer to.
Yes, I did. And there's a link to that. There's like a web page for that collaboration between Dark Sky and the crime prevention standards.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. We have no more public comment in person. Is anyone waiting online?
We do have one online.
Okay.
Go ahead, Colin.
Good evening. This is Colin Fisk with CRTP. I just want to start off by saying that I'm really excited to see a lot of the good progress that was made through the extensive planning process for the general plan be implemented through the zoning code. So happy to see that moving forward. And at this point, I just kind of want to make a broad comment and maybe give a couple of examples, which is, I think, and maybe this is clear from the presentation you already got or the discussion you've already had, but I think there's sort of broadly two different categories of implementation measures that you will consider. One of them would be just very straightforward. There's a policy in the general plan, and it just simply needs to be added to the zoning code. And an example I would give of that is the elimination of parking minimums citywide. That's fairly straightforward. No more sort of decisions or discussions I think are needed, since that was fully discussed during the general plan process. Then some of the measures require some more interpretation, and that's where most of the discussion hopefully will be. And I'll just give one very specific example that I noticed looking through the materials for this packet, which is that there's a category of land uses proposed for transportation, communications, and utilities, which includes transit stations. And my first reaction to that is that our local kind of a transit station, which we can refer, I think, for context, to the Earth Center in Eureka that's about to be built, we're not talking about like a huge bus depot or rail station. We're talking about something that could and should be a mixed use project that would maybe fit more into a typical mixed commercial and residential category than like a utility substation or something. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm excited to see this move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. Anyone else online, David? Okay, with that, I will close public comment on this item and then open it up for a discussion amongst us. And in the past, when we've had open-ended long conversations, we've set an end time just so that we know how long we'll be here. Do folks have? I think in the past we've done 8 or 7:30. I mean, I just want to get a consensus on that. We will be talking about this again in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone want to suggest a time or?
Why don't we shoot for 7:30 and just see where we're at that point?
Perfect. We'll do a check-in at 7:30. All right. Opening up the conversation. Would anyone like to? Yeah.
I'd like to just ask a staff clarification, and or your presenter is, besides all the zoning changes that we're talking about incorporating, is a lot of this reformatting to make it more user-friendly for everybody, staff and the public?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of reformatting that they're recommending, and I don't think we should spend a lick of time talking about that at this level, unless you really want to get into that detail.
I really don't. I just wanted to hear from you that is I mean, it sounds like an ambitious goal and a wonderful goal, and I guess that they've just gotten better at it over time, right?
Yeah, and I love the fact that we have intelligent brains like Monica's working on this, that thinks in that way, that can really organize the content in a more cohesive way. One of the things they pointed out to us is that we have standards scattered all throughout the code. You almost have to know that you need to go hunting for the standards in order to find them. And so that's not user-friendly for our staff, and it's certainly not user-friendly for the public. So they're going to be consolidating all the standards in one place, all the processes in one place. And I anticipate even just the format of the content, the way that they have the highlighting in the tables, the different blue colors to indicate, it's a real pleasing way of being able to organize the information quickly in your mind and read the table quickly without having to hunt and peck. Right now, all of our content is black and white, and to the uninitiated, I mean, it's kind of like the Matrix. I can see the Matrix when I look at the code. You all just see normal people. We see the code dripping down, and it's that sort of thing. So we want to make it so that everyone can see the code, and I think their reformatting is going to help us do that. I did want to mention too, before we get too deep into this, that Chair Simmons had submitted some comments that we were able to get out to you in your emails. I presented a copy of that, paper copy of that on your desk, and then there's also some copies here for the public if anybody wants some to follow along. And we really can just start anywhere, wherever the commission is interested in beginning. We did put those, suggestions together as to where we could start, but it's really up to y'all.
Did you have a comment?
I was just very grateful for the reformatting, and I just wanted to say that while we were briefly on that topic. But yes, I agree we shouldn't spend any time on that. And I guess I'm kind of curious with this. Some of this stuff is references different areas, and like to me it's really useful to communicate in a written way through this, but I'm understanding that's probably not okay with the Brown Act. So this all has to be like an oral communication.
So what we've done in the past, and it's been a couple of years, but when we were going through the general plan, you can do what I did, which is submit written comments to David. David can then publish them for the public to view, as well as all the planning commissioners. And as long as everything that you're saying to us is also visible to the public, there is no Brown Act violation. And so that really does help facilitate these conversations, because we know what people are thinking in that way.
And I'll let David confirm this, but I believe if you get comments in advance of the packet being released, they could even just be published with the packet. So if that's something that you're able to do, that gives the other commissioners more time to look at it too.
And they were during the gateway discussion. I mean, often our comments were part of the packet.
Yeah, and I'll also, I mean, we've got the next couple of meetings planned out because we're really trying to prime the discussion for your joint study session. But, I anticipate having many more planning commission meetings where we go over detail as you get more familiar with the material. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that if there's a desire at some point, for commissioners to, form a subcommittee, there are a couple of commissioners that wanted to work on this material outside and kind of brainstorm, and or if you want to come and work with staff and brainstorm, all of that is on the table, and we're happy to do that to help facilitate this conversation.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, while we're talking about the format, I just want to say the diagrams that I saw were really well done and helpful. I think anybody trying to follow the code, looking at those diagrams, they were very clear.
Yeah, kudos to LWC.
I just wanted to mention that I'm not going to be present for the next meeting. I'll be on vacation. So I will take advantage of sending my comments early enough that they can be included in the packet.
Yeah, it's also my intention to send comments to you all so that we can just have a bit more time over, before the next meeting, just to be able to process a bit more. But maybe I could suggest, Matt, that you kind of walk us through or give us the general overview of some of your thoughts here, since we do have this in front of us.
Yeah, happy to start. I don't think we'll get to it all by 7:30, but that's why you start now. So the way I organized my comments was by packet page number. And then I have bolded and underlined sort of the topic that caught my eye that I thought I'd have something to say about it. So just, starting to a packet page 86, there was a discussion of wanting to add setbacks for sensitive adjacencies to industrial and agricultural. These were things that I don't think we talked about in the general plan, but were flagged in this process as something that would need to be in implementation. And so all I'm saying here is I'm open to this, but they should probably be very different for different kinds of uses. And so we need to have a longer conversation about what kind of, because you don't want the setback to be so large that it makes it so that you can't actually have housing built next to the, yeah. Okay, that was all for that one. There was on page 87 a discussion of neighborhood compatibility that I felt, at least from the way that I talk about our infill goals, was sliding back into some of the character of the neighborhood language that we've been trying to move away from. And so I was flagging that. We actually sort of want to add bulk and scale to some of our neighborhoods, as that's like the explicit goal of, yeah. Page 92, there was discussion about staff recommendations to reduce minimum lot size. I was just flagging that I strongly support that. Also on page 92, there was the language about limiting accessory dwelling units, which I think we should remove. I think the packet was also recommending we remove that, but I was noting my agreement with that. I don't have to read off every single one of these, but maybe I'll try. Yeah.
You're doing a good job.
Okay. Page 93. Oh, this is exciting. So there was a suggestion to add a build to line to our code. So we've been trying to not require quite as much of a setback, but you can do the opposite and require a build to line where we say to developers, hey, we actually really do want you to be using as much of your lot as possible. I love this idea, and I'm curious if we could get some direction from staff on like what other cities have done in this way. Yeah.
Can I make a comment on this one? I actually would love like 0 setbacks because I think that setbacks are actually pretty well handled in the building code, requiring, fire separation and all of that. And as a designer working on like ADUs, which get rid of certain setbacks, there's still with like constructability concerns and fire assemblies for lot lines, there are just kind of built-in setbacks that I think are handled in the building code. And I don't actually think that setbacks within the, I think we would be allowed to use more of the lot if we got rid of setbacks, but that's a pretty radical idea.
Why would we require people to do that? It should be flexible, not require you to build to a certain distance from the lot line.
Yeah, so I think this is a tension that we've seen in a lot of these areas where, we're getting rid of requirements, but then we're also trying to shift, building patterns and development going forward. And so with a build to line requirement, and it could 0 would be maybe, but I don't know. You're sending a really strong signal that's like, hey, we actually want development to change in this community. This is actually, it kind of goes back to what I said during our first item, which is like, hey, we're talking about upzoning this neighborhood. Like it'd be nice if people were thinking about that as they were developing plans. And yeah.
I think to the build to line point as well, you might decide that it's more appropriate in certain zones than it is in other zones, where you have, commercial mixed designation, or the gateway area, where you're really trying to densify. A build to line allows you to create, a streetscape that has a uniform feel, and you can really create, from your code, pedestrian scale environment as new buildings come online. So it may not be appropriate in all settings. In residential, very low density, do we need a build to line? Probably not. In our downtown, we effectively, if you don't have a built to line, there's a 0 setback in the downtown to begin with. Everyone builds right up to the sidewalk because the parcels are so small and the property is so expensive that you need to use every element of it that you can. And so, to Commissioner Ham's point, I think the commission may want to, evaluate, do we eliminate some of these other requirements that are already dealt with in building code?
Well, it's a part of what we're
interesting
doing with like the Valley West code and with the Gateway code is trying to make places of our city that don't currently feel like that feel like that. And so a build to line could be a strong signal to developers like, no, we are serious that we want this to be a walkable, community, right? But,
I think the code that we adopted already pretty much does that. We really encourage, commercial on the ground floor and housing above. And as you pointed out, it doesn't pay to not build to the lot line.
Is your suggestion on 0 lot line that that's in all zones, like residential low as well?
It would apply to residential, yeah. I think for state ADU laws, there's 0 lot lines. And, I think in designing those, there's fire code, fire separation distance that you have to consider. And I think, this natural setbacks kind of come into play with drainage and whatever. But I think there's like an arbitrary 4 foot that's put often in like, or 5 feet or 10 feet in rear yards or side yards. And I think, that's generally keeping like the mass of the neighborhood. But I think when we're looking at placing ADUs or second units or lots of other things and adding additional density, especially in residential lots, I think having a 0 lot line would be really beneficial. And I understand like the front, like street frontage is pretty highly regulated and like cities do it quite differently, but there's often like an averaging that happens on the front lot. And so maybe there's an exception there, but more density, you know, I think having more space to be able to build bigger units is beneficial.
So perhaps it would not affect the front setbacks as much as the rear?
I mean, I think it should be everywhere, but you know, I'm really open to hearing more, especially from our consultant team too, on if they know of whether this is happening anywhere and everything.
Great. Thank
I will just add before we leave that topic that it would be consistent with some of the other decisions that we've already made in our zoning updates with many districts. We've already made the decision to eliminate floor area ratio as a standard because it ends up conflicting with the other site development standards that we have. And so it would be in line with decisions that we've already made to try and free up the development potential for lots that are not created equal. You know, when you build your code, you're thinking of a perfectly rectangular, 6,000 square foot lot. Most of them don't look like that.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to kind of, delve deeper down the rabbit hole of setbacks for ADUs, I wanted just to build on Commissioner Ham's point that for ADUs, because they are streamlined through state law, there are provisions that allow for 0 setbacks if it's conversion of an existing structure. But if it is a new build, there is still a side and rear setback requirement of 4 feet. So it's not like you're building completely to the lot line for all new builds on every side of a parcel. But it's kind of going in the direction of reducing setbacks.
Well, we don't have to decide on this one right now, but maybe we're flagging it for a future.
You don't need to
conversation.
decide on anything right now. Yeah.
Hey, can I just pitch on that one that I'm very curious about building maintenance? When neighbors start building right up to property lines, how do you even paint the wall or fix a rain gutter if you have to go into your neighbor's yard? What if you don't get along? I don't know. I just wonder what comes up.
Well, if you look at San Francisco, a lot of the residential infrastructure is 0 lot line, property line, like just built. I've encountered this in many projects where they're using the neighbor's wall to build their bedroom wall, and it's like a nightmare. But I think if we do it intentionally, there's a way.
No one has to paint the walls because they're, Okay. So that was build 2 line. Where are we on time? 5 minutes. All right. Well, this is the cute one with the photo, so that we'll end on that one. So there was a conversation about building massing, and we had this conversation during the general plan. But I feel like in the 2 years since we had this conversation last, my beliefs about visuals of buildings have changed and updated. And I often have found that people ask to break up building massing, and then they complain when you build the building that breaks up building massing. And I have this cartoon here on the following page that I think kind of illustrates this, which is that the massing breaks and all the sort of Lego bricky stuff that people do when people ask them to break up the massing end up making a building that not everyone actually finds architecturally that appealing. Whereas a solid sort of cube building with some nice ornamentation on the outside can, for some people, and I know that architecture is very subjective, for some people actually be a more aesthetically appealing thing. And the upside for builders, and I'm not a builder, but my understanding is that can actually be a bit cheaper of a way to accomplish these goals. And so to me, we should be saying to developers like, hey, you don't always have to break up the massing if you do enough ornamentation to make the outside of your kind of square boxy building look appealing. And I think the example of this that really has settled it for me personally is the Jacoby Storehouse, which is a big solid brick of a building, but it has great ornamentation on the outside, and so people love it. And my joke in here is like we should be permitting future Jacoby storehouses in Arcata, right? We shouldn't have a requirement for every single building that it have the broken up massing, that we see on a lot of new development because it's being put into all these codes. And so that's my pitch. I'm not saying no building could ever be built that way. I'm just saying, like, instead of requiring both ornamentation and broken up massing, we could have a either or there as we go to implement our code. Thank you for letting me be on my soapbox about this issue.
I think it's a good idea.
Well, yeah, that actually went. What? Anyone have any? Okay, looks like people are generally in agreement with me about this, which I'm happy to hear. Okay. Page 96, Sylvia flagged this in her public comments, but there was a discussion of electronic message signs, and I think we should be doing everything we can to have those be either not allowed or in compliance with our dark sky policies and codes. I as someone who travels around Eureka at night sometimes, I'm often very frustrated by the big neon and glowing signs that are sprung up around the city. I'll actually take this as a moment to say I second what Sylvia wrote in her comments and think we should be doing that as well. Page 107, I think actually after hearing the report from the consultants, I understand this better, but there was a discussion of complete streets, and then the deliverable in the table was like, we will only be doing this for the Valley West form-based code. My understanding of the city's complete streets policy was that as we repave and update roads, we sort of do it automatically, but this is specifically for any newly planned circulation as part of the Valley West form-based code. Is that the way to think about this? Okay, then that's just me misunderstanding the packet. Great.
I'm sorry. I think that comment might also apply to the electronic message signs. In the bullet that reads, standards should reflect current illumination practices, particularly for billboards and electronic message signs, just because our current standard is essentially no canned lighting. And there's about 500 different types of lit up signs now that are not canned lighting, many of which we've had to approve because we didn't have a standard against them. So I think that's an area where we want to make sure that we focus.
Yeah, I agree.
And I will say for the dark sky lighting, Waterkeeper's comments when they came in as part of the LCP were forwarded to LWC as well. So they, I believe, are planning to incorporate that.
Excellent. All right, moving on. Oh, this is me asking for too much. I'm going to skip that one. Page 108. CM2A, land use development patterns, standards related to street design will be addressed in the Valley West. That's the same one. Sorry, I as I was reading the packet, I didn't quite grok the separation of work. Okay. 108 we've covered. Here's one. So in the air quality section, we have restrictions on land uses with drive-through facilities. And my preference would be to move towards this citywide or in more places generally. I mean, we're trying to make Valley West a walkable community, and permitting more drive-throughs there, I think, would go against that goal. It's interesting to me that this also comes up in the air quality section of our code, because I feel like there are other reasons to not want drive-throughs. But that was a flag. Page 111. I've just repeated myself a whole bunch of times here. Page 112, but I flagged all the places in the packet where it comes up, so maybe that's helpful. Page 112. There's a discussion here about creating buffers between incompatible land uses. This actually goes back to the very first one about setbacks. I think we have to be very careful about what we think of as incompatible uses. In the past, we've thought of multifamily housing as incompatible with single-family housing, and so I'm trying to make sure that as we do this, we're being careful.
Yeah, 100%. And with the Gateway area, we had several discussions about this specific topic, and essentially we wanted to prevent the most dramatic conflicts in the code, but with the Gateway, we really allowed laissez-faire, and let the market sort out which land uses are incompatible. in particular, you know, if you have a mixed use building, you know, you're not going to put a welding shop below your residential units because, or, you know, paint booth, because they're not going to be filled if you do that. And so, you know, it kind of guides itself a little bit. So I think it's in that similar vein.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're moving on. This was the very end of the packet where there were the suggestions from the interviewees. And I found a few of them kind of interesting and worth discussing. One was, so we have open space requirements for new development. And one of the suggestions was that if the development was within walking distance of a public park, we didn't need to require as much open space on the development. I suggested, you know, a quarter mile as a potential sort of, you know, conservative walking distance. Yeah.
That's about 5 blocks to visualize it. For some people, that's a long way.
Yeah, and this is pulling back open space, and so I'd be open to either, if people are not interested in this idea, we don't have to do it at all, or we could limit it to even like, you know, a fifth of a mile, or, you know, we could keep going into smaller fractions. But it's an interesting, I think, point that if the development is abutting a public park, like maybe you don't need private open space on the new development.
And I will say from staff's perspective, that has been a topic that has come up in the past with multifamily projects, and it's a standard that isn't often followed to the letter of the law. So it is likely worth revisiting just because it typically doesn't happen the way it's currently written.
Yeah, I think we've seen examples of that in my time on this commission. Yeah. Okay, so maybe a thing to flag for a future discussion of if we want to do that and exactly what a good amount of distance would be to consider it under. All right, page 120. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to flag us at 7:30. It is past 7:30. We are close to the end, though, if people want to just, okay. And then we can focus on other folks' comments at the next meeting. Okay, so page 125, one of the commenters suggested that neighborhood conservation areas allow too much neighborhood input. We also had a conversation recently about neighborhood conservation areas and maybe a need to revisit them. And so I'm flagging that I am very interested in that.
I support that.
Yeah, are they part of the new code?
Mid-rise buildings.
Neighborhood conservation areas.
That is a topic that we want to have a in-depth conversation with the commission about. And I won't even start to touch on it right now, but I think it's a good conversation to pick up on the 26th.
And I will also add that they are codified in our general plan currently. There's policy, you know,
So unless
speaking to that.
we eliminate them, or they will be.
Correct.
There was another comment, and this is more of a question for staff. So there was a comment on page 125 that says requiring a zoning administrator approval for low-rise buildings limits missing middle development. And I guess I'm trying to better understand. They're asking for an even more streamlined review than a zoning administrator approval. Am I reading it correctly? I'm just trying to make sure I understood the.
Can somebody from the LWC team maybe comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did go back and review the notes from that interview, and specifically the discussions about in the gateway area. And the interviewee was referencing the distinction between like up to 37 feet required ZA, and then above 37 feet actually requires PC. So the concern was that that might end up making it harder to get approvals for a low mid-rise building than the larger buildings. What we took from that is that generally speaking, it's harder to get the lower, or the comment was that it's harder to get approvals for low and mid-rise buildings in the gateway area. And I think what the interviewee may have been referring to is that, well, the taller buildings are going to go through ministerially anyway because they'll have density bonus, and so really it disadvantages missing middle. Regardless of what the interviewee's assumptions were, what we took away from it is that we should make missing middle housing easier. We should make it throw up fewer roadblocks for missing middle. But we do acknowledge that right. So okay, so that's hard. So then what? Or that's difficult. So then what? What is the message there? And we acknowledge it's a little confusing.
I'll also just remind the Planning Commission, two kind of points about the gateway. On the one hand, depending on which zone you're in, there are minimum sizes to be able to get the streamlined permitting, the ministerial permitting. And so if you're in a zone that requires, 3 or 4 stories at a minimum, and you say, hey, look, I only want to produce a 2-story building, and now you have to go through a use permit to demonstrate that you're still meeting the objectives, you're creating sort of the inverse problem, whereas it used to be you had to have a use permit for, or some more detailed permitting for larger buildings. And then that, was more process that meant more people got to comment and so on and so forth. This is the inverse, so that, we're saying we want larger scale buildings. We want those mid-rises to come in. And so we're principally permitting those. And if you're proposing to do less than that, if you're not meeting our minimum residential standard, then you go through a permit process to make sure that site is still going to, meet our needs. So that's one category. And the other category of, challenge is that despite the fact that these are ministerial permits, we built into it a public hearing process. And I think that was done, my interpretation is that was done in order to help build community trust. We haven't had a whole lot of experience with the, with the code yet, with these larger buildings. And, frankly, I feel like we made a pact with the community to share very publicly the decisions that are being made, even if they are ministerial. And so I wouldn't recommend that we, go back on that we, not renege on that promise to the community at this point. Maybe after 5 years or so of implementation, we'll realize, hey, this isn't needed anymore, and we'll change that policy.
Yeah, I remember those conversations very well. And so that was why I was confused by this comment, because they were sort of implying that the ZA for lower buildings would be more difficult than but I see what they're saying, that if they're both objective standards either way, okay.
I'm not sure which of those two they were referring to, but probably the former, that, they're saying, look, I want to build a 2-story building, but you require me to build a 3 in order to get that streamlining. So what gives?
Yeah. Okay. All right. The next one, I lost my spot. Second conversation about neighborhood conservation areas, flagging it again. Next one, page 125, land use code should allow developers to negotiate trade-offs. This was another open space conversation and I remember this conversation during the general plan, you can require a certain amount of space, private space for each unit of an apartment, or you could have like a nice shared private space for the people in an apartment building. And so the commenter in our packet had suggested, like, hey, it'd be nice if I could make like a really nice community garden or courtyard for everyone to share, rather than having sectioned off private. And I am sympathetic to that as a better way to build multifamily living places. And so to whatever extent in implementing the code, we can work with them on that. I think that's a good idea. Okay. The next comment was the standards for placement of residential buildings in mixed-use zones are too restrictive. I mean, we're talking about a build to line now of 0. So I feel like we're trying to reduce any restrictive placement stuff.
I think they're probably referring to our current standards. And we definitely are proposing to change those.
Perfect. Okay, last one. So there's a conversation in there about requiring commercial space. And I thought we had talked about this in the general plan, but I think in a commercial mixed zone, you should absolutely be allowed to build a 100% residential building. Those are the people who are going to shop at the mixed use developments next door. And so I'm just flagging my support for that as something we should allow in our commercial mixed areas.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think this is one of the topics that we want to spend a considerable amount of time on in this update is what specifically do we want to have these mixed use zones do? We changed all commercial zones to either commercial central in the downtown. Every other commercial zone is a commercial mixed, where ostensibly full residential build out would be allowed, on any given parcel. And so I think it's going to be an important conversation for us to sort through. Do we want to make sure that there are some standards for commercial being retained in those districts? And then the other thing, we have kind of a couple of different buckets of topics that we want to bring to you. One of those buckets is, are you sure? Is how I would define it. You guys made some decisions, the council made decisions, and we just want to, now that we're taking the time to update the zoning code, go back and revisit some of those decisions and make sure that we really want to try and implement them. One that's come up for staff is the standard in a commercial mixed zone that requires that residential units be developed with new development or substantial rehabilitation. And we provided an out for properties that want to do 100% commercial, that they would, there's a use permit process that they can go through to allow for that 100% commercial development. I think in practice, this is a moot point because almost everyone I've talked to over my entire career has said, I want to put more residential. I've not talked to a single developer who said, I really want to come and build commercial space in your town. Why can't I do that? And so, I think we need to have a full conversation, revisit all of those questions. We may land in the exact same place, ultimately, but commercial mixed use is a great opportunity for infill development. I think we need to take the time to get it right.
There's a lot of important topics that I've heard us needing to take on, and I'm not seeing that we have enough time built into the schedule. Are we hemmed in? I know that we have a target of June 8th because we're meeting with council, but that's not a deadline, is it, for decisions?
No, really what we want to do is, try and focus on the biggest topics for your next meeting, and to dig into those. And that'll set us up for our conversation with the council on the 8th. We'll put together, a list that we think in particular touch on some of the more sensitive policy issues that's important for the council to weigh in on, to give us and our consultants direction for that June 8th meeting. But we'll have plenty of time to dig into the detail. I think our next meeting will be structured around the topics that, staff think are most important. If commissioners have some input on that, please let us know before we're putting the packet out.
And will we be straw polling at this next meeting to decide as a group if we're pushing some of these ideas forward?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to use some of the strategies that we use through the general plan that seem to work real well to build consensus and quickly sort through issues.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a 2-year project, so June 8th is not the deadline for giving us all of your feedback.
What is the ultimate timeline? Where are we going, and what's the final result?
Monica, can you pull up the slide that you had with the timeline on it? Okay, let's see.
Well, there is some kind of final result.
They will publish something.
So basically we've got our timeline for the land use code updates. That's task 2, the second bar down, running through the beginning of 2027. And these aren't hard and fast timelines, but basically through the rest of this year, And then, if as we get into the details, the land use code or any of these topics, if we feel like we need to, stretch them out in order to get it right, it's, in my opinion, more important to do that, to, go slow to get it right. And really, we've got until, the end of 2027, the beginning of 2028 before we're anticipating adopting these. So I feel like it's plenty of time for us to, have the conversations, revisit the conversations, mull on them, decide we don't like broken up buildings. We like, boxy buildings with ornamentation and get that into the code as well.
Great. Well, that was all of my initial comments. I reserve the right to make more in the future, but that was from this packet what I had to say. I think we've had a good meeting, and we will come to the next one with more comments to digest. Any final thoughts or questions or anything? Okay, I will close this item. Moving on to correspondence and communications. Do we have any correspondence from Planning Commission members?
Just mine that I won't be here next meeting, so.
We will miss you. Any correspondence from staff? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if you all saw the Ezra Klein gubernatorial debate amongst, really it was a forum on housing, state housing policy. It was quite interesting, and I would recommend it. It's on YouTube, easy to pull up. Ezra is a great moderator for the subject because he cares a lot, and it's a good listen.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, one communication from staff. I think that Monica touched on it, but we are planning a open house in partnership with the engineering department for the Reconnecting Arcata project that I believe is happening on the 29th. David or Monica, could you confirm? And it's open to the public if anyone wants to come and give any feedback on that project. Just kind of to let you know, we're going to be talking not only about the form-based code, but primarily talking about connecting the different communities within Arcata that are segmented by the highway and ways to do that. So if that interests you, please attend.
Excellent. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.